This video is brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you wish to support the channel and allow me to dedicate more time to producing such videos, you can do so with a small monthly donation on patreon.com/balkanodyssey.
Nimalo optimistični izvještaji stranih obavještajnih službi o potencijalnim prijetnjama za našu zemlju i za mir.
Rat je moguć u Bosni i Hercegovini, poruka je iz Komisije za vanjske poslove Evropskog parlamenta.
Ova situacija sve više podsjeća na 90. Idemo li u rat?
Tako je. Slažem se s vama. Neodoljivo podsjeća na 90. godine. Retorika je čak i gora, radikalnija, prljavija, odvratnija nego što je bila 90. godina.
Taj čovjek dovodi Bosnu i Hercegovinu na ivicu rata.
Ali sljedeći rat će se desiti malo brže nego što smo ga mi dočekali. To vam ja kažem, svega će biti sem da se nećemo čerati. I nikad se niko nije čerao da nije na čeru. I čerat ćemo se još.
The previous month has been fuming with breaking news about the political crisis and potential reignition of conflicts in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Every single political YouTuber, newscasts, and article spoke about the fuming tension between the Serb entity, Republika Srpska, and the central government, with not so subtle hints about a looming physical conflict that might just erupt in the middle of Europe. Again, only 26 years after the previous bloodshed had been put on pause. In a nutshell, this sensational political crisis is insinuated by political stunts coming from Milorad Dodik, the most well-established politician in the Serbian entity, who has held various high positions of power essentially since the end of the war in 1995. The initial motive for the tensions was the enactment of a new criminal law in July, which would make it illegal to deny genocide and war crimes, a law promoted by Valentin Inzko, the outgoing High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina, a position created by the international community in 1995, to oversee the implementation of the Dayton Peace Accords. This position has been a significant thorn in the eye for Dodik and the Serbian ruling elite, as the authority of Serbian institutions is often overruled by the Office of the High Representative and Western envoys, which goes against the interests of the Serbian ruling class and the Russian oligarchy, but has also, on a more material level, perpetuated a political stalemate in the country with a dysfunctional neo-colonial system. Dodik's response boils down to continued provocative political stunts and military posturing, including warnings that the Serb entity will seek to establish its own judicial, taxation, and military authorities, essentially boycotting the central government and performing an act of secession from Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Ono što ste pokušali ili otimali u prošlost morate da vratite. Republika Srpska je vlasnik prava na vojsku, vlasnik prava na indirektne poreze, vlasnik prava na Visoki sudski tužilački savjet i još 140 zakona koji su nepravno, krađom, ignorisanjem Republike Srpske otete Republike.
A particularly daunting and sensationalist point is the potential formation of a separate army for the Serb entity, which would split the country's armed forces in half and optically provide a basis for a looming military conflict. Geopolitically, this whole drama reveals two historically well-established and already crystallized interest groups. On one hand, the quote-unquote international community, generally consisting of Western nations of the imperial core, the implementers and overseers of the Dayton Peace Deal, who generally stand in defense of the Office of the High Representative and the Bosniak and Croatian bureaucracy, and demonize the Serbian secessionist movement and their allies as the primary architects of this crisis and as a generally destabilizing factor for the status quo.
Ako dođe do toga da kažu NATO će nešto intervenisati, mi ćemo zatražiti pomoć naših prijatelja koji su nam rekli jasno i glasno da oni svoje prijatelje nikada ne ostavljaju na cjedilu.
Ko vam je to rekao?
Dovoljno što sam rekao.
The former political camp is predicated on the alleged humanitarian concern for stability of the region and the protection of Bosniaks, whereas the latter is based on equally metaphysical and superficial notions of quote-unquote brotherhood with Russians and the Serbs on the other side of the Drina River. These geopolitical tensions have provided the optics necessary for continued fear-mongering about a potential reignition of military conflicts in the country and wider region, with sensationalist titles all over newscasts and online articles, warning about quote-unquote very real prospects of a return to conflict. However, if we take a step back and view the material base of these political performances, we see the same old paradigm which has initiated the civil war in the 90s itself and prevailed to the present day as the method of maintaining the status quo and hegemony of the ruling political forces. So, instead of wasting your time with vagueness, I'll be rather blunt with my statements. There will be no war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The whole shit show is nothing more than a political stunt, similar to the dozens of bluffs and maneuvers conducted in the previous 2 decades. This type of flexing and posturing is nothing new, and is one of the many ways in which domestic capital protects its interests from growing discontent among the population. I've already described these psychological and political manipulations in my Balkan obsession with war crimes and Balkan obsession with separatism, both of which are a must-watch if you wish to understand the material essence of these antagonisms and tensions, beyond the mere nationalist theatrics. Nonetheless, the crux of the matter is this. The ruling elite and their capital are dependent on preserving antagonisms and tensions between the working classes and the individual nationalities and ethnicities. With warmongering sensationalism, they legitimize their position of power and justify their existence. And nothing makes it more obvious than the fact that these stunts, more often than not, take place before the upcoming elections in order to rally up their voters and stay in power. Without this, the depressing reality would become more than apparent. The fact that all the constituent peoples live in poverty, with skyrocketing levels of unemployment, that they're experiencing worrisome levels of depopulation and emigration, are subject to the mercy of nepotism, partocracy, and corruption on every step of their daily lives, that they're being screwed by their bosses and slave owners, that they're breathing dangerously polluted air, being treated as third-class citizens in Europe, and robbed by the very political institutions that promise to protect their quote-unquote national interests. Without these sensationalist parades, flashy news articles, and continued posturing as the protectors of national interests, their house of cards would fall as quickly as it was built. Essentially, everyone in the country knows the inherently corruptive nature of Dodik and the ruling elite, yet these stunts make us forget about the systemic problems and social decay and see them as doing, quote-unquote, at least something for our people. In the words of Rosa Luxemburg, quote, "For the capitalist class, militarism has become indispensable. First, as a means of struggle for the defense of quote-unquote national interests in competition against other quote-unquote national groups. Second, as a method of placement for financial and industrial capital. Third, as an instrument of class domination over the laboring population inside the country. Furthermore, when it comes to geopolitical meddling of the West and the East, it's self-evident that imperial interests are the forefront of their ambitions, not brotherhood or humanitarian concern. So, if there's something you should take from this video, it would be the following. Don't fall for it. This is not the first nor the last time that such stunts will be instrumentalized for the protection of the status quo. You deserve to know better, and you can. All it takes is a pragmatic approach towards this political shitshow. And the only conclusion, and at the same time first step towards building an alternative to this snake-infested cave, can be summed up in 2 words: class consciousness.